From the TAPR DCC 2018, deploying a multi-site DMR system for the total eclipse of the sun, starting now. Good afternoon. I'm in Yantis, Texas, outside of Lake Fork, and it is beautiful, rainy weather out here today. My name is Jason, I'm KC5HWB, and this is a talk that I recorded at the TAPR DCC in September 2018. Special thanks to the guys out there for allowing me to record those sessions and bring them to you on my YouTube channel. If this is your first time here, please click on the subscribe button below so that you can keep up with all the other videos that I post, which is going to be a lot more from TAPR and a lot more digital communication style videos, which I specialize in doing on this channel. So today we're going to hear from Mike W9CN for his multi-site DMR system that was deployed during the total eclipse last year. Hope you enjoy the talk.
So let's up next, we got Mike here. So how about John? Is he not here?
John became a recent first-time father and couldn't get a hall pass.
As he should not.
Yeah, yes.
As he should not. Okay, so what we have here is the title of Mike and John's talks, Deploying a Multi-Site DMR System for the Total Eclipse of the Sun. I'd like to introduce Mike Pappas, W9CN, and his co-author is John Spanhauser, N0JPS. So take it away.
Thanks, Steve. So good morning. It's still morning out there, right? And it's actually warming up a little. I had to go outside and stand out in the 90-degree weather to warm up a little bit. As I mentioned, John was just became a brand new father and couldn't get a hall pass. So Dave Lanning, KD0SEM, Dave, raise your hand. He's our balloon fill expert, aka gas passer. There are going to be a bunch of jokes here, and also download this presentation because I've got like a bazillion slides here. And we're not going to get through them all in the time allocated. But Dave was one of the guys that actually went out and used this system. So who's Edge of Space Science? We fly balloons. We've been doing it for 28 years. We have an FAA Part 101 waiver, which allows us to fly heavies. We provide the FAA with real-time APRS beacons. They route airline traffic around where we go. That, of course, gives our insurance guys the vapors, but they kind of get over it. We've basically been doing it for 28 years. About 75,000 students have been touched. We've generated several dozen hams. We've done 278 launches, 278 recoveries. There's our certificate of waiver from the FAA. We renew that every year. It allows us to do things that most balloon groups can't do. We were flying NOAA air cores, which are 300 feet of stainless steel tubing, and they weigh about 28 pounds apiece. We run those all the time for NOAA. We have a website like everybody else. It's edgesspacesciences.org. Eclipse, everybody knows that we had an eclipse, right? And NASA wanted us to fly a couple of balloons for Montana State University. It was supported by Colorado Space Grant Consortium, about 300 local students. Our target was 85,000 foot ASL during totality. And the balloon launch site was Camp Guernsey Army Airfield, Guernsey, Wyoming. We had some problems. Our problem was there was only one amateur radio repeater that actually got into Guernsey, and that was the WA7S and U2 meter machine located at Cherry Knoll outside of Wheatland, Wyoming. We assumed that the repeater would be useless during the eclipse because we figured there would be thousands of people on it, which by the way there were. And it didn't cover our predicted landing area. And so of course that was kind of a problem for us. So what we got here is, if I can push this, launch site Camp Guernsey predicted, whoops, hang on. Predicted landing area, that's Torrington, Wyoming, if anybody's familiar with it. Up here is Lusk, Wyoming. This is Harrison, Nebraska. You're looking at approximately, center of this landing area is about 40 miles from launch site. And so we needed a radio system that we could put in that would actually cover all of this for our track and recovery teams. Picture of Camp Guernsey. How are we going to do this, right? Well, first off, there's virtually zero cell coverage outside of any of the cities in Wyoming. We had to figure that they were going to have 700,000 people come to Wyoming for this thing. Yep, and the whole population of Wyoming is like 579,000, right? So the state doubles, more than doubles in size. We figure that cell service is going to be impossible. LTE data support, that was a joke. We did a stress test on the Verizon LTE system in Torrington, Wyoming, and crashed it. We took their LTE off the air for an hour before it came back up. Okay, and we did that multiple times because we thought maybe it was just kind of a fluke, right? No, it just didn't work. We had serious concerns about whether or not we'd have enough fuel or food. And we had to have absolutely reliable communications. So how do we solve those problems? Well, first off, a couple other questions come to mind which you folks might ask, which is, are we running VHF or UHF? Well, all of our APRS stuff and DF beacons are all on VHF. And the problem we ran into with doing anything in VHF was you tended to wipe out your APRS beacons. And DF, your APRS beacons for us when we fly them are 50 milliwatts. And 50 milliwatts from 95,000 feet up doesn't give you a lot of signal to work with. And you tend to wipe the beacons out, or the packets out, when you're using VHF for comms. And we moved off from VHF for track and recovery communications a number of years back. Just for that purpose. So how about we build a multi-site analog FM system? Well, a couple of advantages of doing that are, everybody's got analog FM radios, right? I mean, they've been around since Armstrong invented FM, and that was a joke. And everybody is familiar with the audio quality. The cons, of course, are users would have to know where they were in relationship to wherever we deployed repeaters, and they'd have to make sure they were selected correctly. And if they didn't do that, that would be a problem. Our track and recovery team was mostly unfamiliar with Wyoming, making correct selection almost impossible. And as Dave will point out, when you're doing a track and recovery, you got your head in the computer. You're driving down some gravel road, usually at a high rate of speed. I don't want to say triple digits are involved, but triple digits sometimes are involved. And it's a lot to keep track of. Additionally, we had some security concerns about, our NASA payloads getting scooped up by somebody and hauled off and then held for ransom. So, obviously anybody with a scanner can take a listen to an analog repeater channel. And there's some issues with analog linking and how you get that done, and latency. And typically when we do track and recovery, transmissions are pretty tight. And there isn't the ability to have long pauses waiting for the system to unlink and link itself up. So what about DMR? Well, the pros are, it's easy to link the systems together using IP Site Connect, and we can do site ping and Tier 3 DMR radio support roaming lists, which makes site selection automatic. We could rent gear economically, and some of our guys had DMR gear and experience. And what was very interesting for us was we got 2 time slots on 1 frequency, and we'll talk about why that's kind of important later. Cons we'd have to get the system to be absolutely user-friendly. It had to work with an absolute minimal amount of training. I cannot take all of our track and recovery teams and train them for this event. They've already got their hands full doing this whole Eclipse thing. Now, one of the big problems that we always run into with DMR is managing audio quality expectations. And the feedback from the older guys like myself who have some sort of hearing impairment, okay, yeah, somebody said you know, is that it's not, quote, as crisp as analog, and we needed to make sure we managed our users' expectations with DMR. Obviously, we need to rent gear, and obviously that costs money. The good news is there's a company up in Lakewood, Colorado that rents that kind of stuff, and it's relatively inexpensive for us. So we decided we would do a test flight and try DMR and see if it was going to work for the big event. So a year in front of the Eclipse, we ran a test flight, and we built a DMR system and deployed it. So one of the issues is, where are we going to put these things? Okay, so we need to find repeater sites, and then we need to run propagation studies based on the flight and landing predictions to make sure that where we're putting sites actually covers where we think we're going to go. And we ran into the guys from, well, first off, let's start with the easy stuff. Let's coordinate some frequencies. So we reached out to the Wyoming frequency coordinators. We told them we needed 5 pairs of UHF narrowband digital ESC frequency pairs with a minimum of 100 kilohertz spacing between pairs. And why did we want to do that? Well, because on the off chance that Dave Lanning's 100 yards away from me and he's roamed into one site and I'm roamed into a different site, I wanted to make sure I had enough channel spacing so I didn't have a war between the two of them or some sort of wonky desense problem. And they gave them to us. And we, of course, tend to document everything pretty well. And Wyoming frequency coordinator guy was really good. And off we went to the race. So we wanted to do pinging. And pinging is where all your repeaters put out a ping. In this instance, we did it at 30-second intervals. And the radios look up for that ping, and they read the RSSI value. And we set our RSSI based on drive testing at 108 minus 108. So you would select the site if you were at 108 or better. Okay, so 108, 107, anything, right? Radio would say, okay, when I push the transmit button, that's the site I'm going to use. We did 30-second intervals because that's a half a mile at 60 miles an hour. We figured that's enough to get you into a different site potentially. The topology down there is hilly, if you're not familiar with it. So we needed to make the system as simple to use as possible. Okay? We had to have absolutely no user involvement. They didn't have to have a checklist. Turn the radio on, call up this preset, push this button, wiggle your nose, waggle your finger. Just had to work. And all I wanted those guys to do was turn the radio on, adjust the volume, push the button, get the go tone, talk. Everything else had to be completely transparent. We did that, didn't we do that, Dave?
Yeah, it worked great.
Okay. So we started by talking to the guys at the WA7S and U2 meter repeater guys. Terry Myers, the trustee. We reached out to them and said what we were doing. They connected us with the Cherry Knoll site owner, who's another ham, conveniently. And I called her up and gave her the pitch, and she was all about letting us use that site. And that's what that site looks like. It's got a 180-foot stick, nice cinder block building. That's Steve Mirror, our certified tower climber. And we're doing 100% tethering, so you know it's as safe as you're going to get on a tower. And that was our ground zero for our system. And we pre-built everything ahead of time. That's a rack, rolled it in. It's got the 8300 repeater in it, duplexer. uninterruptible power supply, network switch. It consisted of a cell-wave 6-cavity duplexer. We used an existing 6-bay Omni antenna on the top of the tower. We used Cambium Networks PTP 650 microwaves. We had a Cradlepoint LTE modem that allowed us to log into the system and use RDAC with it, so we could look at what was going on with the system remotely. From that site, we had available coverage at mile marker on I-25, mile marker 14, and Wheatland is at mile marker 78. So we had 64 miles of coverage from that site, which was pretty good. And the folks were really great letting us use this. Now, just a quick note here. When we go and use sites like this, we sweep the floors, we take out our garbage, we leave the sites in better shape than when we get there. And we want to make sure that after we're done with projects like this, that folks say, boy, those guys came in and they cleaned up after themselves. You know, you don't want to leave a mess. You want to be able to go back at some point and use those sites again. We also needed a site north of Torrington, Wyoming that would have coverage into southeastern Wyoming and southwestern Nebraska. It had to have a clear microwave shot to Cherry Knoll. Craig Murphy, who's the Goshen County Sheriff's Department dispatcher, we ran into him a couple of years in advance of the event. And of course, we put him to work. And we asked him if he knew of a site in Torrington, north of Torrington, that would fit all those parameters. And little did we know what we were getting into. He called back a couple of days later, and he gave me a phone number for a guy by the name of Gene Lay. And Gene's got 9,000 acres out there where they raised cattle and purebred horses, and they settled that ranch in 1843. And Gene's got a VHF radio site located on top of a massive butte. Well, that's pretty cool. And Gene was all about letting us use this because Craig Murphy had warmed him up ahead of time saying, these NASA guys need a site, can you help them out? And that's a shot. It hailed about 20 minutes later. So we got the lat, long, and height from Gene, ran the pattern studies, microwave shot looked good, off we go. We ran a UHF coverage. Now, the Canadian Research Council used to offer a longly rice radio prediction service on their website, which they've subsequently discontinued, which is somewhat of a pain. We used worst case receiver sensitivity numbers, underestimated transmitter antenna height, and ERP. Our target was 45 microvolts a meter or higher of RF energy. That's all I cared about. I didn't care how much bigger it got over that. I just wanted to know we were at 45 microvolts a meter or better. Okay? And that's what that site looks like. So this is Harrison, Nebraska, Mitchell, Nebraska, Torrington, whoops, hang on. Right, Highway 26. Now this is key. Here is Guernsey. We expect that tracking and recovery teams are either going to be taking this south through Torrington and north, or they're going to go on Highway 26 to Lingle, and then they're going to take Highway 85 up to Lusk. That's the only way you can get to where we think the predicted landing site for this thing is going to be. So coverage out here is critical, and the site did it, except for these areas, which we'll talk about in a minute. What we didn't understand about the Lay Ranch site hurt us. Okay, it was a 45-minute 4x4 adventure to get up to that site once we left the dirt road from Gene's place. Okay, and that was to go 5.5 miles. Broken rock, steep drop-offs, We needed high clearance vehicles. You had to have external spotters to get you through there, like turn a little left or plummet off the side of the butte kind of thing. All right? It was not your everyday sight run. And we damaged a couple of vehicles getting in and out of there over the course of the project. Okay? That's what that looked like. Okay? That was not a fun ride. And through here it gets to be really tricky, and this is where you need the spotter to get you through there, or you will hang up on something that you don't want to hang up on, like your differential case. Okay? Now, when somebody tells me they got a sight, you know, I'm thinking Rome 25, right? I'm thinking you got a shack. I'm thinking you got some things that my brain works with. Well, that wasn't Gene's sight. It was a phone pole with a NEMA box screwed onto it, and that's what his repeater was in. So our problem, of course, is we rolled up to this for the test flight, and I didn't have any brackets to mount the antenna to a phone pole, right? And I didn't have an enclosure for the repeater, so in typical ham best efforts, you know, we fudged a way to get the antenna on the pole, and we wrapped the repeater in a cardboard box and put it in a garbage bag. That's as good as it gets, guys. And for the flight, Gene got us what he called the outhouse, and because he was concerned about us leaving the repeater on the ground. And there's another one of those really nice Wyoming storms that proceeded to hail on us shortly after I took that picture. Microwave was installed, had signal but didn't connect. We had a problem with the ACT timing. So you have to tell both ends of the microwave what your length path is. Well, that was in kilometers and we were in miles. So it was 38 miles one way, and which is 61 kilometers. We had the configuration set wrong. So a team was dispatched back to Cherry Knoll, which is a 90-minute drive from the site. And they go back there and set the parameters correctly, and all of a sudden it comes up. IP Site Connect comes up. Boy, it's easy. We underestimated the simplicity of IP Site Connect. And we overthought it the first time out of the box. And once we were like, hey, this is designed for idiots, we're good. So we test the whole thing on the back of Spainhauer's pickup truck, and then we put it inside of the cardboard box and wrap it in a garbage bag. And then, I'm serious, right? This is, you can only make, we were putting the amateur into amateur radio. And off we go. Down, on the way down was just as hair-raising as going up. And then we had a little problem. We got all the way down to the dirt road and found out that for some reason, the repeater wasn't working back at the top of the butte. So John Spainhauer determines that he didn't power the repeater back up after he put it in the cardboard box. Okay? And we just about killed him on the spot. Okay? So Spainhauer beats feet down to Cherry Knoll because he knows that the enraged comms team is going to dish out some cowboy justice if he hangs around there. And he bought the first, second, and third round at the bar that night as penance for his sin. Myself and Chris Kringle, KB0 Wires, head back up the hill. 45 minutes later, we get there, only slightly worse for wear and a few more gray hairs. And in fact, the repeater was power off, and we turned it back on, and life got good. While we were waiting for John to tweak the microwave, I plugged a laptop into the far end of the microwave and was running Pandora at the end of 38 miles of microwave. That's what that site looks like in the final configuration during the Eclipse flight. We ran a Motorola SLR 5700 repeater, 6-cavity Telwave, cell-wave duplexer. We used a Telwave ANT450D3. If you're not familiar with that series of antennas, those guys make probably the best antennas on the planet. And I can set the pattern in the field. which is way cool because I am done using omnidirectional antennas. You know, I worked on a railroad project this year, and I'm looking up and down 40 miles of track, and the guys that put the radio system in are using omnis, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing the foghorn leghorn thing. I say this is as dumb as the day is long, right? So these are all set to hard cardioid, and they're pointed in the direction I need to go, and I get 6 dBd out of it. As we mentioned, there's a 38-mile microwave link. Off we go. That's some of the how you get out of their pictures, okay? And yeah, this is not a happy place to make runs up to if you don't have to. So we rented a bunch of Motorola XPR 4550s, programmed them up, gave them to the team, sent them up. Off we go. Now, we had a little problem. Balloons are kind of unpredictable, and this flight didn't go anywhere near where we had coverage, which is a huge problem, and I was sweating that deal. It went way north of Lusk, Wyoming, and the coverage that we ran showed that we had virtually 0 RF coverage up there, and somehow or another it all worked. Now, I directly relate that to the fact that we ran such conservative pattern studies that we actually had solid coverage north of Lusk. But in the whole scheme of things, I'd rather run the most conservative pattern studies that I can find and overbuild the system, right? You don't want to put your thumb on the scale because that doesn't do anybody any good when your whole track and recovery team is driving around someplace in Wyoming and have no comms, right? So we learned some valuable lessons there. And Dave, you were on that flight. What'd you think?
Everything worked great. You'll see some pictures in here later of the looky-loos along the highway. But we had coverage all the way from the launch site. I left as soon as the balloon was filled and put in the air. The highways were clear because everybody's parked along the side of the road, and we never lost coverage. I went all the way up to Lusk, over to Harrison, and down south for the recovery, and never lost comms.
We decided, based on the test flight, that we needed better coverage in Torrington, Wyoming. First off, I wanted to be able to, step there. I wanted to be able to talk into the system inside the Holiday Inn Express. And then, of course, the local bar and grill. We just had to have coverage inside the local bar and grill. But seriously, the real issue was we needed penetration into the 911 dispatch center at the Sheriff's Department. And the only way that was going to happen is we needed a site in Torrington. The second time slot was our 911 time slot. And that went to Craig Murphy, who was dispatching that day. And there were only a couple of radios that were programmed with time slot 2. And the idea was if we ran into a situation where we needed first responder support, let's say we stumbled on a car wreck somewhere outside of cell phone coverage and we needed to get a hold of dispatch, we had a way to do it. And Craig carried a 6550 with him for the whole event. And all it did was listen to time slot 2. All right? Again, the other part of this was we wanted to kind of fill in the shadowing here. It was somewhat important. And we had some concerns about Highway 86, but that coverage all worked. We built this system the weekend before the flight. Okay? So, and that's what that looked like. One of the tricks here is because we're running dual microwave paths both to Lay Ranch and to Torrington, we had to PTP synchronize the transmit on the microwave so they didn't mutually interfere with each other. And that synchronization has to be set for the longest path, which is Lay Ranch, which is 409 or 10 microseconds loop. Okay? That's the combined coverage of all 3 sites. It's approximately 5,000 square miles of Wyoming from 3 sites that we did. Okay, we tested and built everything ahead of time, prepackaged it, ready to roll out the door, least amount of mucking around as possible in the field. We bought some used 8300s. We bought a new SLR 5700. You know, there's a bunch of stuff here. You can download this stuff later. We put everything on double conversion enterprise class UPSs. The main site in Wheatland was with an external battery pack, gave us 2+ hours of runtime along with Lay Ranch. The Torrington water tower had a gen set backup, so we figured 45 minutes would do it. Somebody'd probably come up there and figure out if it didn't start by then. We tested repeater duplex performance with my 8920A Amtronics, another ham in upstate New York's maintains and CALs ours. Target receive sensitivity, -120 for 12 dB SYNET at 3 kilohertz deviation with a 1 kilohertz tone. We tested everything in analog mode because we don't have any way to test it in digital mode. We figured if it worked in analog, it'd work in digital. There's a test setup right there with some 8300s, my 8920A, my Rodian Shores FSH4. We document everything. We're just kind of that way. And you can see that Lay Ranch did -121, Wheatland did 120, and Torrington did -121 for receive sensitivity at 12 dB SYNET and analog. Duplexers, we tune all of our own duplexers. We want 90 dB of notch. That's what it looks like coming off Rodian Shores. FSH6, that's the benchtop machine. You can see our pass loss here is 1 dB, and we're at 90 and 93 dB. The other side of that's 1.16 dB loss. We're pretty anally retentive about duplexer tuning. Usually a 6-cavity duplexer takes about an hour to get that good. The Wyoming DMR guys asked us to retune a couple of their duplexers that had some problems. We improved it by 15 dB. John Spainhauer said, one of the Wyoming DMR guys said, "What's 15 dB?" And John said, "It's the difference between Helen Keller and Stevie Wonder." Okay, that's what their duplexer looked like before we started beating on it. And you can see here that its notch is only 77 dB. That's not sufficient. That's what it looked like after we finished it. It was 92 dB notch on it. Now, the downside of once we finished tuning it was we added 0.2 of a dB insertion loss to it. So instead of 1.4 dB insertion loss, it was at 446.988. It was now 1.61. So it was 0.2 of a dB penalty to get you 15 dB better notch. It took us about 40 minutes. We needed a Torrington site. Craig Murphy called the mayor of Torrington at 6:30 p.m. on a Friday night and said, "We need to use the water tower." And he said, "I'll have the gate unlocked at 7:45 the next morning," and he did. Okay. Path was good for microwave, and that's what that looked like. So that water tower is about 70 feet tall, and they had a nice railing around it, which was convenient to put the antenna on and the microwave. And we put that in a environmental enclosure, an outdoor used enclosure we bought from Sunny. And there's a UPS in there, a duplexer, sorry, and all the fun things you need to make it work. As I mentioned earlier, we had to sync the microwaves. We had some concern about fueling, so Craig hooked us up with a local rancher who had 6,000 gallons of regular and 9,000 gallons of diesel. And then when we thought everything was going so well, Lay Ranch got hit by an F3 tornado. So that wasn't good. And the good news was the VHF site didn't get hit, but the Lay Ranch folks were totaled. And so we went up there on 4th of July weekend to help them out. We helped them rebuild one of their barns, and we had a great time. Nice people, real salt of the earth, fun folks to hang out with. So let's talk about Monday the 21st. The sun's obviously ready to eclipse. Launch team is ready to go. Payload's ready to go. DMR network's ready to go. We got some volunteers on Saturday to drive the predicted coverage pattern. Now, we knew it was going to work. Okay, but the reason I did this was two things. First off, it inspired confidence with the users that it actually would work. It refreshed everyone's auditory memory of how DMR sounds. And obviously, we looked at the system while they were doing it, and with RDAX to make sure it was behaving as we expected. They spent 7-8 hours driving that with 4 teams, and each one of those teams logged a couple of 100 miles, which is exactly where we wanted to go. The other thing that did for the teams was it got them familiar with some of the highways that they'd be driving on for the event. In our truck, we ran a 5550E and a 4550, both on UHF, both on the same channel. One on time slot 1, which was main track and recovery. The other was on time slot 2 for 911 dispatch. Because of the packet nature of DMR, there's no descents. So I could be talking to Craig at the 911 dispatch center, and the other radios getting all the track and recovery traffic without any descents. We had guys standing right next to the truck 30 miles away from the repeater site on a 5-watt handheld, and we're talking back and forth without desensing with a 40-watt radio to a 5-watt handheld 30 miles away. It worked great. Here's some Eclipse flight pictures. These people are out of their minds. Folks are wandering down the middle of the road, right? You're like, yo, dude, get out of the road, okay? And of course, you know, somebody's going to get a ticket. And we always have to have a goof shot like this. So we enlisted the Torrington Police Department to help us with our photo. And the guys at Camp Guernsey actually camped out, so they were intense. The track and recovery guys and the comm team all stayed at the Holiday Inn Express, you know, clean, well-lighted, 2-ply. Okay. Track and recovery meeting, August 21st, 8 a.m. at the Holiday Inn Express. Traffic. Yeah, like I said, you just couldn't make this stuff up. There's our alpha, trying to figure out where this is all going. 260, first balloon up, lands 19 miles south-southwest of Harrison, Nebraska. 43 miles from the launch site, 2 hour, 17-minute flight time. Right there, one of the guys recovering it. There's a group of reprobates and ne'er-do-wells out there at 260. 261 goes long because it didn't quite have enough gas in it. And so it shows up 61 miles downrange. This is well outside of what we predicted our coverage for the system. And Dave, you were on that, and?
I was there. We got there about 5 minutes after it hit the ground and still had comms.
Solid comms. I shot some big images. Got to have a couple of those. Now, so what did we learn? Start early. We prepped this project starting 2 years in advance. Contact your state frequency coordinator early. Explain what you need, why, and for how long. We even coordinated a frequency pair for this event. The New Mexico frequency coordinator was Bill W5YEJ, and we're on 444, 400, and 449, 400, 2 time slots. There's an XLR 5700 in my room. That's what it looks like. So you can kind of throw these anywhere if you're coordinated and up and running. Enlist local boots on the ground for support. Who has sites? Reach out to them. Use the ARRL repeater directory. The first thing you try to ask them is, how can we help you for this event? Before you show up with your hand out, right? And why they should help you, and make sure you return the favor that they're extending to you. Like I said, we tuned a raft of duplexers for Wyoming DMR, and we got pretty good at it. And again, we left all the sites in better shape than when we got there. Everything was cleaned up, trash taken out, We found some loose stuff on the Wheatland site tower, which we fixed, and we wanted to make sure that we were great guests. What's really important also is understand the use case and the system user's capabilities. So you got to make this thing work for them, not against them. You got to get everybody's buy-in. You got to make it simple. Manage DMR audio expectations. Understand that older users with hearing loss are going to have a problem with it. The kids will love it. Have a plan B and C. Toss the plans when you need to. And it's going to take longer than you expect. Run conservative coverage studies, absolutely, every time. And we had better radio coverage than the Goshen County Sheriff had. And we were standing in Harrison, Nebraska on a handheld. And they can't get in from there with a 100-watt VHF radio, and we were doing it with a handheld, and they just couldn't believe it. Design the system, cover the unexpected, test every aspect of the system ahead of time, document everything, you might want to do it again. And then, of course, the most important aspect of this whole deal here is several weeks later, once the smoke cleared over multiple adult beverages, looking at all the effort the project took, Spainhauer and myself came to the conclusion that we might have had a significant lapse of sanity. So we're looking for our next big adventure here, and you know, we'd kind of like to do a trunking project or some other wide area stuff, and if it's impossible, we're kind of interested in talking to somebody about it. So if you've got anything interesting going on, see us, we'll be at the bar.
Questions? Oh, okay, right over here.
The PTP 650s, were you using just the integrated antennas?
Yes.
For the 38-mile shot?
Yep, it worked perfectly.
Okay. Yeah, I deal with them in Weld County, and I've got tons of interference, so it's...
Well, so we're out in the middle of
nowhere, right?
Nowhere, yeah. Right? And we did have some interference with Torrington, but we set the, and I'm not the microwave guy, so let me just say that, but we set them up so that they would burn through, and, well, no, I mean, I'm playing RF guerrilla warfare here, okay? So we set them up so they burn through, and eventually they totaled off enough other Wi-Fi interference. Well, they did. It came up and it was perfect. And that path was within a half a dB of predict.
Half a dB?
Half a dB predict. We tend to be pretty, for lack of a better term, anally retentive about aiming stuff and getting it all running really well, because it's, you know, it's the little things that make the difference between having a successful event or having 6 track and recovery teams that are stuck in gridlock traffic that you can't call on the cell phone or get them on the radio. And that's just not where I wanted to be with that project.
Cool. Somebody
else had a question?
Right here in front. Just want to mention, you know, be careful, guys. Your wife will leave you over 1 dB.
Hi, thank you very much. I was just curious, what type of science payloads were your balloons carrying?
They were doing high-resolution cameras, and they were streaming live video and still images.
Thanks.
And when they were coordinated with, so what NASA wanted to do on this thing was they wanted to see if clouds formed when you had the shadow over a specific area. They were looking for cloud formation. So they did an integrated thing where the storm chaser guys from Boulder, who have those truck-mounted Doppler radars, so they had 3 of those lined up on a highway, of course, and I'm running by these things, and they've got them up and running, and I'm thinking, how much RF radiation am I taking at this point, right? Because these things are running megawatts, right? And all I'm thinking is, you know, my next kid's going to have 3 eyes that'll blink sequentially like the old Thunderbird turn signals. So they were coordinating with the Doppler radars and the cameras that were taking pictures going down to see if clouds would form during the totality.
I'm just curious, I mean, this is a lot of effort that you went to. If you looked at things like using Iridium satellite phones.
Yeah, but where's the fun in that? No, I mean, well, the other thing with Iridium satellite phones, it's point to point. So when I need like 3 track and recovery guys to come down to the first landing site, you know, it's kind of more convenient. Just call them on the radio and say X, Y, and Z, meet us at the corner of this and there. Yeah, we could have, absolutely.
I just was curious if you did some kind of analysis or.
The only
understand
analysis
cellular.
was this was going to be a whole bunch more fun. So, no, or brain damage. There's just no ways about it. Any other questions? Well, thanks for your eyes and ears today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.